Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, everybody.
One second. I think we may have some extra tabs open on one of y'all's screens. So just clear out of all the other tabs. Keep your tab that you're in right now open. Clear out all the other tabs, and we'll be good to go. Welcome. This is how we kick things off for real. We just like blast your eardrums. That's like an installation art situation that we're trying to acclimate you to our conversation about art tonight. So I'm E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books. Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We are joined tonight in celebrating a Black gaze, artists changing how we see, from with Auburn Avenue Research Library on African American culture and history. There is the beautiful book. We are so excited to be here with all of you tonight and with our friends at Auburn Avenue. You will notice that Morris Gardner, who is a librarian at Auburn Avenue, is going to be dropping knowledge in the chat. He's already put a lot of wonderful resources in the chat. He will continue to do that throughout the night. Just know that you can revisit those resources at the end of the event, throughout the event, and that they will stay up once the event has closed so that you can revisit them as much as you want. So we encourage you to stay with our live conversation and then go back and revisit the chat after we are done talking. So I want to first introduce you to our conversant and interviewer, Ra Malika Imhotep, who is a Black feminist writer and cultural worker from Atlanta, Georgia. They are currently pursuing a doctoral degree in African diaspora studies at the University of California, Berkeley. Imhotep's creative and intellectual work tends to the relationships between Black femininity, vernacular aesthetics, and the performance of labor. They are the co-author of the Black Feminist Study Theory Atlas, and we are really excited to have them here. They are originally, as I said, from Atlanta, Georgia, and they are working on a poetry book coming next year, we hope. So we're really into that as well and hope to be celebrating that with you next year, Ra. And Ra's going to be holding it down, this conversation with Tina Campt, who is a Black feminist theorist of visual culture and contemporary art. She is the Owen F. Walker Professor of Humanities and Modern Culture and Media at Brown University. She is also the author of Image Matters, Archive, Photography, and the African Diaspora in Europe, as well as Listening to Images. And of course, the book we are here to celebrate tonight, A Black Gaze. As I was saying to Tina, this book is already one of our most pre-ordered books. People are abuzz and excited. I know all of y'all who are here in the audience are abuzz and excited. If you want to shout out where you're watching from, what your relationship is to Dr. Campt's art, to art in general, any of those things, we love to hear it. And if you want to click this teal button to buy A Black Gaze, Artists Changing How We See at any point in the event, you can do that. I am going to encourage you to ask questions via this Ask a Question button. You can do that again at any point. It's not disruptive, and we'll try to integrate those into the conversation. Welcome to both of you. We are so happy to have you here, and we're gonna test out and try and take these mics off mute and see what happens.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to take a moment to offer some introductory words before Dr. Campt shares with us an excerpt from the book. This is really a dream come true on multiple levels, to be in conversation with such a generous and thoughtful and sensual thinker, taking seriously Black art. And also to be doing it in a space hosted and helmed by two of the kind of like knowledge anchors from my childhood, Charis Books and the Auburn Avenue Research Library. So I'm really grateful to be here, beyond feeling honored and blessed and all those things. And before I hand it over to Dr. Campt to read, I just want to invite folks, if you're comfortable, to just take a deep breath. Sometimes I like to make some heat and just hold myself a little bit before getting into something new, but just to breathe and arrive, and decline calls if you need to. Sorry, friend. But yeah, just welcome and allow yourself to come here with us. And without further ado, Dr. Campt, please.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Ra. And And I also feel you about like declining phone calls. It's really incredible how our devices are controlling us so much more than we are controlling them. So feeling you on that one. So it is such a pleasure. It is such an honor and such a privilege to be hosted in this celebration by Charis Books and by Auburn Street and in the Atlanta community. So I am delighted to be able to just share a little bit of the book with you. This is kind of a teaser, and what I'm going to read is a very short extract that I hope gives you some taste of the work that I'm trying to do in the book. Unfortunately, I'm not able to share a screen with the images that I'm talking about. And I apologize for that, but technical difficulties make it not possible. But at the same time, I feel like sharing them would also not diminish, but it may be a kind of anticlimax, because I feel that the way in which the images are presented in the book are really quite masterful, and I hope that you're able to buy it and take advantage of that beautiful presentation. So the excerpt that I'm going to read is from what is called A Prelude to a Black Gaze. And it's called a prelude because it's the introduction to the rest of the book, and the rest of the book is organized around a series of verses rather than chapters, because one of the things I'm trying to do is really to express something in relationship to the work of the artist that I'm talking about and engaging. And the section I'm going to read is a section where I talk about a short video made by the filmmaker whose work initially really inspired me to write about a Black gaze in the first place. And that filmmaker is Arthur Jafa. And many of you may be familiar with it because it is the video that he made for the song 444 by Jay-Z. So I'm just going to start and launch into it. And I'm going to apologize in advance because I have a large dog who sometimes likes to Zoom bomb me. So she will calm down. Okay. A prelude to a Black gaze. A silent serenade between Jay-Z and Beyonce, live on stage. Singing, serenading, flirting. It's sassy. It's sensual. She teases. He taunts. And they both tantalize. She loves it. He clearly loves her for it. And we're captured by their exchange of smiles and glances, and her twirls around and around him, layered over the sweet signature whisper of Al Green, cooing his love song come lullaby, Judy. The footage is grainy, but its texture has nothing to do with age. Its grain comes from its visual frequency, which filmmakers, editors, and cinematographers commonly refer to as frame rate. In this case, it's an intentionally slowed frame rate that reveals the tender relations of both the scene and its subjects. This grainy, slow motion clip gives an intimate framing to one of the most public Black couples on the planet. The sequence spans only a few seconds, though it feels far longer, then erupts to inject live concert audio of call and response, with Queen Bee stoking the audience's collective refrain. But this tantalizing scene is preceded by shattering footage. Film footage culled from Birth of a Nation toggles between cell phone footage of a Black man being beaten by a scrum of white police and CCTV footage showing a car mowing down Black bystanders in a parking lot. Interwoven amongst them is additional footage, cell phone video captured by ordinary people of street scenes, parties, and dancers drawn from an endless archive of found footage posted on various online sites. A different cell phone video captures a prepubescent boy belting out the opening lines of Nina Simone's signature rendition of Feeling Good, with the vibrato of a 60-something blues singer seated in the back seat of a moving vehicle. It transitions to hyper-pixelated footage of Eartha Kitt, mid-soliloquy, waxing characteristically defiant, poetic, and dismissive of love and relationships. Silent portraits of two Black feminist theorists flicker briefly between these and other unlikely scenes, leaving unanswered questions in their lingering shadows. And a bleach blonde Black man, filmed against a blindingly white background, bears witness to hearing the voice of the Almighty speak to him in the moment of his temporary death after taking a bullet. He recounts his reflections with the wisdom of a shaman and the charm of a player. The video for Jay-Z's 444 is chock full of love and loss, beauty and brutality, Black pleasure and Black precarity. Although produced as a visual and commercial vehicle for the song, the video is no way beholden to it. It is a work that inverts the relationship between image and song by transforming the music into a vehicle for the astonishing montage of images created by Arthur Jafa and the T-Neg Collective. It coalesces around a series of visual duets that intertwine pleasure and despair and juxtapose the extremities of Black life in the 21st century. We see these extremities through the intentionally grainy frame of Jafa's cinematic lens. It is a grain that emerges when the diminutive frame of cell phone video is expanded to a much larger screen. But it's also a grain that we feel as much as we see it. We feel the rough, unfocused grain produced by zooming in for a hyper close-up on cell or CCTV footage of a beating or a drive-by. We feel the grain of a zoom in that allows us to appreciate the artistry of an impromptu subway performance and improvised dance at a party or a backseat solo performance. We feel it in the halo-like blur that results when a master cinematographer shows us the power of the everyday visual practices of ordinary Black folks' amateur videos. They are videos that allow us to see ourselves as discerning and uncompromising witnesses who adamantly refuse to look away. 444 whiplashes us between giggles and gasps, winces and sighs, yet what weaves the emotional extremes of this 8-minute collage together and connects the mosaic of clips it gathers to the lyrical apology Jay-Z professes in the song is a breathtaking physical duet created by the coordinated sinews of muscle and flesh of two extraordinary movement artists, acclaimed flex dancer Storyboard P and MacArthur Award winner Okwui Okpakwasili. The two did not rehearse prior to the take included in the video. They were asked instead to dance simultaneously in tandem. What emerges is an organic symbiosis and a spontaneous interaction. They never touch, but there's contact nonetheless. The correlation of their bodies is something more than a dance and more than a choreography. It is a corporeal negotiation of intimacy and distance, tenderness, tension, and rage. Storyboard and Okwui Okpakwasili's fleshly improvisation mirrors the emotional apology that is the dominating lyric of 444. Placed in the context of the larger stream of visual duets it gathers, the video offers a very different kind of mirror. It is a mirror on Black sociality. It is a mirror that reflects and refracts an uncomfortable portrait of Black life in the US at a moment when its most stunning and honest visualizations are those that twin the joys of the Black quotidian with the pain of Black precarity. The video captures Okpakwasili running languidly, then fluidly, at times seeming as if she's about to launch into flight. But most of the time, she remains in place, vibrating intensely. Her body ripples, her neck rolls. She appears to rotate on her own axis. She undulates at a distance from Storyboard, then grazes him closely. She turns away, then faces off in a confrontation that pivots back and forth between aggression and intimacy, conflict and vulnerability, apprehension and deep affection. As Storyboard passes behind, alongside or in front of her, the motion of his body suspends time and seems to deny the physics of the corporeal relationship between skeleton and flesh. He moves neither vertically nor horizontally. His body flows like a viscous material that mediates solid and liquid. He flows, she flows, and as I argue in the chapters that follow, Black flow is creating a radical Black gaze. Or put another way, we flow. Watching 444 isn't easy. It doesn't tell a story. It narrates neither the lyric of the song nor the sexy hip-hop life of bubbles and bling. You have to work to understand the connections between its various clips and sequences. I get goosebumps listening to the vibrato of that young boy singing in the backseat of a car. It's chilling to watch a scene of a Black boy on an auction block culled from Birth of a Nation. It hurts to watch video footage of police officers' relentless abuse of a Black man spliced so seamlessly into clips of parties and concerts. And it's harrowing to watch a body bounce off the hood of a moving car careening around a corner, intentionally hitting a bystander. But 444 is a video we both want and need to see. Its beauty and its power is that it requires us to be present. Watching it requires us to cycle through discomfort in order to appreciate its moments of sublime reverie. Reverie in Black love, in Black survival, and in a future we were never promised, yet claim and cling to vigorously and vociferously. It's a discomforting, aspirational, defiant gaze. It is a Black gaze. This book sketches the contours of this emergent Black gaze, focusing on a group of artists whose creative practice produces radical forms of witnessing that reject traditional ways of seeing Blackness, ways of seeing that historically depict Blackness only in a subordinate relation to whiteness. What defines and unites their divergent practices is their ability to make audiences work. They refuse to create spectators, as it is neither easy nor indeed possible to passively consume their art. Their work requires labor, the labor of discomfort, feeling, positioning, and repositioning, and solicits visceral responses to the visualization of Black precarity. A Black gaze asks us to consider what kinds of work these artists ask us to do and what kind of labor it requires of us. Posing these questions means asking what is at stake in their work, as well as what are the stakes of creating this particular kind of art. My answer is that these artworks demand a different kind of response, or more precisely, a particular kind of responsiveness. They insist that we actively inhabit a state ranging from disorientation and unease to implication and vulnerability, and that we work through these responses to come out somewhere new and important. They demand a recognition that we are implicated in the precarity of Black life in the contemporary moment. In embracing or refusing this implication, we are faced with a choice: act or be complicit. It is a recognition that requires us to develop a different way of engaging art by way of a Black gaze that mandates our participation in and interaction with the social and political questions these works raise, in ways that leave us vulnerable to their effects and better off for it. Thanks. I think you're muted.
This is the point where everyone is clapping in their home audience rooms. Thank you so much for sharing that excerpt from us. Again, the writing in this book is so inviting and sensory. And it reminds me of the Barbara Christian quote where she says, what I write and how I write is done to save my own life. But then she turns towards sensual language as language that makes sense. And that definitely feels like an apt description for the work that you've generally done, I think, across your books, but particularly in this latest release. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
I want to start with a question about naming and about the way that you've come into naming yourself and your intellectual practice. Your bio describes you as a Black feminist theorist of visual culture and contemporary art. And I'm just curious how you arrived at that kind of concise naming of such an interdisciplinary venture.
You know, part of it has to do with the fact that it's been such a journey to get to this point. I didn't start out as somebody who was trained in art or was writing about art, but I went on a journey that took me here. And at each point I had to come up with a description that allowed me to speak in my own authentic voice. I mean, I was trained as a historian, and I was first an intellectual and cultural historian. And then in order to do the work that I wanted to do in trying to write about the history of Black Germans in the Nazi period, I had to become an oral historian because I needed to talk to people rather than simply dealing with or researching the material that was written about this community. Right. So I had to become that. And their journey sucked me into thinking about or to engaging their photography, because that was the place where their most authentic expressions of self were captured in these photographs of their everyday life. And so I had to become somebody who wrote about vernacular photography, right? So I became a photo historian. But those images led me to other images of other Black communities in the Black European diaspora, the Black British community, and their very different ways of capturing themselves through studio photography. And then all of those vernacular photographs led me to artists who use those everyday photographs to express something else. So they were actually commanding this archive and taking us in a different direction with that archive. And so that drew me into art. And so the name that I have come up with is, I've always been a theorist, right? But I realized, I'm not just a theorist of photography, I'm a theorist of how images shape us culturally and allow us to articulate ourselves culturally. So I am an artist, I am a theorist of visual culture in the African diaspora, and I am first and foremost and always a Black feminist. So put it all together, and that's who I am.
Yes, I love that. A theorist of how images shape us culturally. Absolutely. And I also love the forthrightness of Black feminists. And this is a stray off the track that I laid for myself, but I have been thinking a lot about specifically the weight of what it means to say that you're a Black feminist over and over again, knowing that those words register in so many different ways for so many different people. But there is definitely something, I think, and I'm definitely still in the middle of processing it, but there's definitely something significant and anchoring about choosing to explicitly center and foreground even that political identity.
I absolutely agree. I mean, it's absolutely necessary for me. On the one hand, it's necessary because it's about acknowledging who brought you to where you are, right? Who taught you to think?
Yes.
Who gave you a framework for articulating who you are? And that is Black feminism. That's Black feminist theory for me.
Yes.
So I have to claim that because I have to acknowledge that I am not the beginning of something. I'm the continuation of something. Yes. And at the same time, it's a shot across the bow. It's about, I just want you to know that that is my position. And I claim that. And I'm not going to hide it because it gives my interlocutor, right? A heads up. It gives them a heads up that this is where I'm going to be coming from. And if you need to prepare yourself, you do that. You can do that. But it's just being honest. That's my positionality, and that's where I'm going to speak from. And I find it actually very. It's a shorthand. We cut to the chase that way.
Wow, absolutely. Thank you so much. I can't wait to watch this back because I know what you just said is about to be something I literally write on my wall. Thank you. I mean, I think part of, or there's something that Horton Spiller said about, like, in its attempt to defining an aspect of Black feminism in an interview she did for like Brandeis magazine, which is where she got her PhD from, and my alma mater, randomly. But she described Black feminism as a practice of concernful care for other human beings, which brings me towards like relationality. And the book starts with such a beautiful, acknowledgement of relation. You dedicate the book to AJ, who opened the door, and Saidia, who pushed me through. And I'm wondering if you will share about like what it feels like, what it means, what it opens up, and why it's necessary sometimes to be pushed through the door of inquiry by loved ones.
Yeah, I mean, the metaphor that I was describing is an invitation that AJ invited me to write about his work. And I was captivated by it long before he asked me to write about it and to write a piece. And I told him I can't. I can't. But he was, yes, you can. Sure you can. Just do it. And then I moaned to Saidia, and he said, of course you can. Just go. Just do it. And yeah, but there is something about, we all have to give ourselves permission to do certain kinds of work that we're not necessarily, that's not necessarily within our comfort zone. Mm-hmm. But the affirmation of others near you, near to you, who tell you what you are capable of even when you don't know it. Yeah. Right? That's the relationship that I needed to acknowledge, is again that I'm walking with a group of people who brought me to this point. And that's what acknowledgements are, dedications are about, is making those folks visible. Yes. And I needed to acknowledge the invitation and the affirmation that brought this book into being. And to always do that, because the myth of superwomen, the myth of super people, right, is very seductive, seductive. But I cannot invest in that myth, because that myth leaves you alone. Yeah. It leaves you alone with the work and the thinking you're doing. Mm-hmm. And everything about the work that I do is a conversation. Yes. So structuring it as a conversation is incredibly important to me.
Yes, absolutely. I think you took the words out of my mouth, but there is definitely a way that within the field of Black studies, this like beautiful, like really intense critical playground that we find ourselves on, there is the seduction of the soul genius, or the need to perform like mastery, expertise. I arrived here and I know. Mm-hmm. And I think something that I learned from you and Saidia's work is about ways to like really articulate the conversation, to name the chorus, to throw away that pretense of sole authorship, and allow for a different mode of being that is more honest.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, embracing that honesty is really important, and it's something that academics are not necessarily encouraged to do. And we do it we avoid it at our peril, because not embracing the honest limitations that we're constantly encountering makes us much more vulnerable to failure, right? But if we embrace them, then failure becomes part of the journey. Yes. And that's what I'm trying to encourage people to do, is to embrace their limitations and to make those limitations a point of departure, as opposed to, an endpoint or a wall. Yes. that doesn't allow us to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yes, limitations as points of departure. Wow. You've mentioned a lot so far, this idea of the journey, both the journey of arriving to the work, the journey of arriving into like an articulation of your practice, your praxis. And also it strikes me that the book itself narrates several journeys. But I'm wondering, like, aside from the kind of the invitation from AJ and the encounters that make their way into the book, I'm wondering what's your, like, do you have an earliest moment of feeling like you were brought to bear witness to Black art, or that you were brought into this process even before you had theorized it?
Well, you know, you had shared some initial questions with me, and they got me thinking. But this particular formulation of the question is even more interesting. So there was you had asked me a question about like my first encounter with Black art, and I realized that, or you had sent me that question, and I was thinking really hard about that, and I realized that it was quite late. It was in college, and it was through my roommate, who was a studio art major, and my roommate, like two of my roommates were studio art majors, and I was a history major, so I was like a little nerd. But that was in the 80s, and they brought me into it because they had just discovered Basquiat's work. And he actually came to my undergraduate institution, Vassar, and he was just extraordinary. He was just this extraordinary person. So that was my first sort of encounter with art and with Black art. And then there's a long hiatus where I wasn't necessarily encountering it. But then I feel like I was drawn back into it through this, what I described about watching or seeing Black artists mobilizing an archive, right? Yes. And that was the overlap with my work and my passion, which is archiving and what we do with archival material and how we recreate archival material. And so one of the people who whose work really did lead me in that path was Isaac Julian, right? And then also, you know, sort of South African artists like Santu Mofokeng, and, you know, and just sort of seeing the overlap between the writing of history and the creation of Black art. And for somebody who, you know, who is a theorist of the African diaspora, it just became another way of writing that history and writing those histories of community and culture is by taking the archive and making it art. And that's what drew me in. I have to say, that's what really was the anchor or the magnet, and I had to follow it.
Oh, I'm myself. I wonder if that's. Do you hear it, or is it just me? I hear an echo.
No, you're fine.
Okay, all right. Yeah, thank you for that. Like again, these beautiful journeys that are so felt in the work itself. You use a mode of description in the work, and we got to hear it some in your excerpt where you're naming things as you see them. And I did not plan to name drop Horton Spiller so many times today, but it makes sense. And I related to what she described as first order naming, right? Like a naming that comes as if it's just off the tongue, right? You name what you see, but of course there are theorizations of thin description, thick descriptions, close readings. I'm wondering if you think about Spillers when you write about art, and also who the other people in the room with you as you think about art writing are.
Hortense is always in the room with me. Period. Full stop. You know, because once you have gone into her framing of, you know, Black life and what, you know, these formative moments through which Black life in diaspora has been shaped and structured, you can't let it go.
Yeah.
You cannot let it go. And as a Black feminist, you cannot let that go. So, so yes, she is always in the room. And at the same time, you know, the other two folks that are often in the room with me when I'm thinking are two good friends, Christina Sharp and Cynthia Hartman, who again have shaped how I understand what it means to be a Black woman in the world at this particular moment as something that is not simply about the present, but is always about the afterlife of the past being brought to bear on all of our circumstances. How that relates to writing about art is also interesting. And, you know, the practice of writing that I am deeply invested in is one that is not trying to tell you what to think, but again, is inviting you into a conversation.
Yes.
And in order to have that conversation on an equal or reciprocal level, I always feel like I have to define my terms.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to be as clear as possible and not assume that you have the same understanding of those terms or even agree with me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the reasons why I have all these definitions. I always have definitions because there are multiple ways of understanding any given term.
Mm-hmm.
And I want us to have a common meeting site
Yes.
for that conversation. And we can disagree, but at least you know where I'm coming from.
Right.
And it's my deep belief in, for example, the way in which what I've learned from Christina's work is she is the person who gave a name to the way in which I think and the way in which I write, which is what she describes as thinking juxtapositionally.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So what does it mean to put things in relation, not necessarily as comparative or identical, right? But what do we see when we see things in relationship to one another? Mm-hmm. And that has become a framework that has been incredibly generative to me. Mm-hmm. So it's not about it's not about comparing, contrasting. Mm-hmm. It's about thinking things together mm-hmm. and seeing differently on the basis of that relationship.
Yes. Yes. What a word on method. I think that if that was the way we were taught to think and write, we would be in a different place right now. And I'm just really grateful for you naming that. Another method that you share so generously in the book is your way of viewing art. Like, again, like how you literally position yourself in relationship to works of art. And I've called it like a choreography of witness. Share that Deana Lawson calls it your studio practice of writing. But I guess I'm wondering if you'll share with folks who haven't read the text, just like what is that process for you and what does it open up?
Yeah. Well, part of the process is about making yourself small in relationship to the work. And for me, what that looks like is literally to sit on the floor of a gallery or a studio or a museum, and to literally let that work have a kind of, or actually make space for it to have a physical encounter with you. Not that you're touching it, mm-hmm. but that you're taking it in a way that you're not trying to diminish it by consuming it, right? You're not trying to take something from it. You're trying to actually experience that encounter on its most honest terms. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I try and do, that my practice is I try and write to the image rather than about it. I'm writing to those images or artworks. Again, to me, is about being accountable to the fact that this is me, right? I'm not telling everybody else how they see something, mm-hmm. but I'm trying to share the responses that I have and trying to orient those and mm-hmm. anchor those, both in the environment in which I am encountering them, the larger historical moment in which we're encountering that context, as well as the physical one.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a way that I often find that writing about art often goes in two directions, either to write about it as criticism, right? So you're explaining it,
Mm-hmm.
or to write about it as historically. So you're talking about, where it's coming from, or what it has in common with, or how it departs from a larger body of work. And I find it very useful to be in a moment of encounter that does not negate either one of those approaches, but enhances them. Enhances them to be able to talk about its relevance, as well as what might be transformative about it. Because one of the important things about this book, and one of the reasons why I wrote it, is because the art was having an impact on me and saying things about our contemporary moment, about our society, about our communities, that I found more powerful than a lot of the writing about the same thing that I had been doing. And I needed to give an account of how that was happening, because it was really complicated. I didn't know why it was so emotional. I didn't know why it was so powerful. I didn't understand initially why so many people were responding similar to me. Yeah. And that was the journey, is to understand how that was happening. And that's the place that I started to write from. I started to write from how it was happening in me as a way of sharing it and hoping that others could allow themselves to do the same thing.
Yes. Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's just so good. Like letting it wash over me. One point in the book where you articulate what you've just narrated, as far as like how the work speaks in ways that the criticism or the think piece does not, is in your chapter on Luke Willis Thompson's auto portrait and other works. I'm wondering if we might go there as a way to really think through the distinctions between a Black gaze and the Black gaze, and then the work that you've done around, like, expounding what for you does the Black and Black gaze mean?
Yeah. So, that's a big question. So one of I had to stop myself at a certain point, because I had been in an earlier phase of writing. I had been talking about the Black gaze, and I was uncomfortable with that, because it's creating the same kind of monolith that I'm trying to work against. That the idea of the gaze has become so monolithic, it's become such a kind of shorthand for any kind of repressive mode of looking, or frame or structure of looking. And I've had friends and artists who have said to me, well, we can't reappropriate that. You cannot, you can't divorce it from that long history of oppressiveness. I refuse to not reappropriate things. I want to actually allow theory to be able to command, theory and Black communities to command the power of a term like the gaze. And I don't want to diminish practices of looking to superior and subordinate. But talking about a Black gaze does not, isn't as prescriptive, right? It isn't saying how. It isn't specifying that we need to see in a certain way, that we need to understand certain relationships of looking in a certain way. And it doesn't become this kind of lens that is either right or wrong. And so in writing about Luke Willis Thompson's work, one of the things that I'm saying is that, and trying to make very clear, is that a Black gaze is not about how Black people see. It's about how Blackness is engaged. What we allow ourselves, how we allow ourselves to position ourselves in relationship to Blackness.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I'm not trying to make an argument for something that is an identitarian practice of looking.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to get people to be able to contend with
Mm-hmm.
the multiplicity of forms of implication,
Mm-hmm.
right, that a Black gaze would create.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them are uncomfortable for me, right, even as a Black person. And I need to reckon with that. So I'm trying to offer it. And again, I did not write this book as this is by, for and about Black people, right? It's really about what is the challenge that we need to rise to
Mm-hmm.
in looking differently and
Yes.
seeing Blackness and the circumstance of modern Blackness in an anti-Black world.
Mm-hmm.
I think that from whatever vantage point or whatever position you inhabit, you have to be able to contend with that.
Yes. It brings to mind the work of Saidiya Hartman, thinking about how we become like scenes of subjection, how images become so familiar that we forget to discuss. And I think your invitation to look towards the discomfort, to sit with the discomfort, is like in conversation with that in ways that you just articulated. And it's also making me think of Lorraine O'Grady's Olympia's Maid essay, where she's like, literally at some point through Spillers, she's talking about how we have to be able to deal with the discomfort, to look past the shame, to look past the things we feel like we should be embarrassed by when we see Black, in that essay, when we see like a Black female subject, when we see Black female nudes. And I think there's something so big about like soliciting that, to say like, look deeper, feel what you feel. Yeah.
Oh, now I do hear a little bit of an echo. You okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're breaking up slightly, but I'll just pick up where you left off, which is that I really was trying to come up with a term, a framing, a practice that would help us to understand what it means to do that. It helps us to understand what it means to embrace the labor, embrace the discomfort, and do something more than simply being uncomfortable. And so one of the things that propelled me to first write about this was hearing some folks respond by saying, I need more time to process this. I need you to help me to understand or to prepare me for the anxiety or the distress of particular works that were difficult to watch. And I realized not all of us have that luxury to be prepared or to think through in advance of encountering a certain level of labor or discomfort. And putting that on the page was really important to me. It was really important to me to actually, name the difficulty, name the challenges that we're facing, and name them as things that artists are making us, they're not allowing us to avoid them. There's something within these particular works that that forces us into that confrontation. And if we take up that space of confrontation, we will get someplace else. But we need to actually make the effort to do that.
Thank you. I'm trying to fix my little sound issues, and I'm not sure. Okay. Hello?
Go that better with them. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. All right. It's happening live.
Always. Well, you know what? I'm wondering if we should think if there are any questions, and If so, I don't know. Because I think we're rounding up now.
I don't see any questions in the questions tab.
Okay. Well, I'm so sorry that you can't be, that your situation, that your end is malfunctioning. But gosh, I think we've had an amazing conversation. And maybe what we should do is we should ask ER to come back, because we're just 5 minutes before our time frame. I'm not sure how best to deal with everything now. Where are we going?
Hello, can y'all hear me now? I'm gone. Wait, no.
We can hear you.
Oh.
Yes, we can totally hear you.
I'll rest. I have a question that I want to ask, but I feel like the garbled sound is going to be distracting.
I'm going to mute Dr. Campt's mic, and you ask your question, and then we'll unmute it, because I think some of what's happening is a little bit of an echo. So let's try that.
Okay, thank you. So I wanted to invite you to talk about at least one of the pieces that you engage in the book. And the thing that feels most, I'm really excited to talk about the image on the cover of the book. And to think with you, or to think with your reading of this piece by AJ Crystal and Nick Siegfried. You describe this figure. I want to read the quote so I don't mess up. He said, the ways that a Black feminine figure can exude a strength that exceeds gender. And then later in that chapter, you discuss spillers, right? And the assertion of ungendering in that process. And I think there's something I feel through your text, through the kind of Black feminist invitation that you bring to each of your verses. I was going to say case studies, but verses is more appropriate. But I'm wondering if you'll think with me about the ways that the examples that you've chosen are inviting us to really think critically about Black femininity, about the ways that figures who we make a lot of easy assumptions or we have a lot of expectations on. I'm thinking about Diamond Reynolds' Quiet, and how scandalous it was for Diamond Reynolds to be quiet in the Luke Willis Thompson piece. I'm thinking about your readings of Simone Leigh's figures and the way they hold court, the sonic protection. And then I'm thinking about the inherent queerness that you read into the figure on the cover of the book. And I guess it's a big question that kind of lost its question mark. But I would love to hear you talk explicitly about the ways that Black femininity, or the representation of the Black feminine, has come up as you've done this work of chronicling or engaging a Black gaze.
Right. I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, as a Black feminist, I'm drawn to these powerful representations, but powerfully unorthodox representations of Black femininity. Right, it's in all of its, that entire range and that entire broad spectrum that is not dependent upon gender, right? And so I really adore the image on the cover, not only because of the ambiguity and the questions that it raises about gender and femininity, and gender, femininity, and vulnerability together. There is a way in which the strength in that image is belied by the tear, right, which does so many different things. But at the same time, one of the things that I love about that image is the relationship of Blackness to Blackness, right? So it is a dark-skinned figure on a dark background, and the challenge of lighting dark on dark, and the mastery of being able to give that kind of contour to a dark face and a dark background. One of the things that it does is it actually gives us so much insight into the various gradations of Blackness, right? And the subtlety of those gradations of Blackness. And so I was delighting in the idea that the cover could be reproduced in a way that brought people into contact with that. But you're absolutely right that throughout the book there are so many instances of the power of femininity to conjure survival, against all odds, without apology as well. So that's part of what I was drawn to. And yes, you're right. The counterintuition of what does it mean for Diamond Reynolds, one of the criticisms about Luke's piece is that she was rendered silent when her act of bravery was to speak out. I feel like her act of bravery was not so much to speak out, although that was it, but it was to be calm, to be rational, to talk down this police officer who had just killed her partner, right? The level of control that was demanded of her to protect herself and to protect her child, right? That to me, Autoportrait's rendition of her confronts us with a power that cannot be referenced in words, right? It cannot be. That her strength that we are confronting is both the strength that she had to make that confrontation without losing her mind, right? As well as to be accountable to the fact that we cannot and should not ever ask her to do that again, to repeat one more time how harrowing that experience was. And we need to respect, how humble we have to feel in the face of this woman who was able to do the impossible. But yes, I mean, each one of the renditions of Black femininity that I'm engaging there stops us in our tracks. It really does. They stopped us in our tracks. And one of the things that I find most powerful about this very disturbing or disruptive Black art at this moment in time is that it is not only uncomfortable, it is embraced, and it is increasingly becoming the recipients of awards and recognition within the art world, right? One of the most conservative places, right? That the fine art world has not embraced this kind of radical Black art, but now it is. And that's saying something about the extent to which our society is moving in a direction of confrontation and reckoning with these kinds of consequences, to be perfectly honest, consequences.
Thank you so much. So we are approaching the hour. There is one audience question, so I guess I'm looking to see would you like to take that question? It kind of fits where you just left off. So from Taylor, we have the question, what is your point of view on spaces of consumption, galleries, museums, traditionally white spaces? How do we reckon with the idea of consumption of the Black female body through the images of the colonial archive versus now where Black artists are very much owning their own bodies of work, but still very much have to show in these spaces?
An important one, and a really important one, which is that we have to think about, how am I going to put this? The question that you're raising is the one of what is the, I want to formulate this properly. So what are the stakes of both the display of this work and the sites where they are displayed, and their entanglement with the same process processes and the same structures of dominance and domination that some of this artwork is trying to challenge. And yes, there is a really difficult entanglement there. But it's an entanglement that I am happy to witness being actually challenged. You know, there we are at a moment when the institutions themselves are being challenged. You know, all of the controversies around curation, controversies at, you know, some of the biggest institutions, art institutions in the country and around the world, that they are suddenly having to examine precisely this question of how are you facilitating a kind of consumption exploitation of the very artwork that is challenging those processes and structures. And what I think is that this particular kind of activism that is calling museums and curators to account has to continue. And in continuing that, we're making a different space, right? A different kind of space where we can utilize these institutions for what they were created or what they should have been created to do, which is to give a lot of people access to art that they would not ordinarily have access to. I am encouraged and I am heartened by what is now being acquired, by the efforts that are being undertaken based on, of course, the pressure, the negative publicity about, you know, based on the kinds of activists that are calling them out, right? All I can hope is that that is going to continue and not dissipate, right? Both because of the pressure of activists, as well as because of the pressure of the artists themselves, right? As these artists become more established, as they can make more demands for accountability, for a different kind of interaction and engagement, the art world is very responsive to that, right? They are very responsive, and the pressure points are on both ends, both on the end of activists, as well as collectors, as well as the artists themselves. So we have an opportunity for change. And that's what I would like, that's my point of view, is that it is a moment when we need to exert maximum pressure for transformation in these politics within the institution.
Exert maximum pressure for transformation now. Thank you so much. Now we'll invite ER to come back and join us, but thank you so much. This has been a delight. And again, I'm scribbling all my notes and I know I'll have to come back and rewatch later, but you've been such a generous and graceful person to be in conversation with. So thank you.
Thank you both so much. This was a gorgeous conversation, and I know lots of folks are going to come back and rewatch it. I want to let folks know that I'll be adding captions to it and putting it up on our YouTube channel, so you can also rewatch it there. And we do encourage you to reshare that version because it is more accessible. We would love for you to click this teal button at the bottom center of the screen. That is how you can buy a Black Gaze from Charis Books. It really does help us when you buy your event books directly from us. We encourage you also to please revisit all of the incredible resources that Morris Gardner has put in the chat for us. Auburn Avenue is welcoming visitors, but you can visit their online archive at any time. It's an incredible resource for folks here in Atlanta, but for folks anywhere in the world, you can check it out. It's really you know, the premier resource in Atlanta, and we're so lucky to have it. So I hope that folks will engage with those things. Dr. Campt, thank you so much for this book. Thank you for all of your work. I know that many people are going to be using it almost as an encyclopedia in some ways, and moving back and forth with it as they are engaging with new media. So that's really exciting. Ra, thank you for all of your work. I can't wait to read more of your work as it comes and to celebrate your future work. And so glad to have you here. So I hope that you both stay safe and well. And until next time, have a great night.